tab, the top tab that says slideshow, and then go to beginning.
I'm at the beginning.
But have you hit the tab slideshow?
On the Zoom.
No, on PowerPoint.
Yeah, I have. I've hit that.
Okay. Well, it's probably the best we can do. It's
what do you see, Dave?
I see what I'll call the editing mode with the slides on the vertical left margin.
Boy, that's not what I see. That's gone.
It looks like his tab, the tab that's open it says animation, and the tab just to the right of it is the slideshow tab. And if you click on that, David, then you should be there.
I'm going to stop share. I'm going to go back to share screen. And what do you see there?
Now we see it.
All right.
Now it's success.
Okay. So here is the cover of the book, and the back cover looks like that. It gives you a good idea of what San Bruno Mountain looks like and what effect the fog has for it. And it'll be available November 1. So we've been working on this now for almost 9 years. And it's been a lot of fun working with Doug and going up on the mountain. And we call this the day at the office. So this is our hard work, is sitting out there studying the plants. It's been quite amazing. 35,000 photos have been taken to be able to illustrate all our species. And as I said, Heyday Books will be releasing it November 1. We'll have a party November 19 in San Francisco. So I'm speaking to you here from Marin, and you're in Marin. Here's San Francisco. Here's the city border. And right there, that is San Bruno Mountain. It's right between 280 and 101. And everybody sees it as they go by on 101. And it looks like a bald mountain with radio towers. You know, Dave, I think I'd like to, can I show you some pictures? I just came back from another trip. I just maybe 4 or 5 pictures. Let me exit PowerPoint and
okay. That's your call.
Yeah, okay. It only takes just a moment. Here we go. I went on this trip, and it's just wild and crazy. We take these paths up the mountain every morning, and the foliage is just tremendous. And sometimes we'd go up dry canyons and then get blocked by some crazy trees. And other times we'd go up little creeks going up the canyon. And they're just amazing ferns, bigger than a person, with plants that look like ours but are different. And look at that tree, just a blaze of flowers. But you go up over the mountain into the seaward part, and all of a sudden it turns dry, and all the plants are dry adapted. They've got, hairs on them to keep them from drying out. Little flowers, but beautiful flowers. And I see in the chat someone went, where'd I go? That was San Bruno Mountain. My point is that every one of those pictures is from San Bruno Mountain. But when you drive by it on 101 or 280, you think you know the mountain as a bald mountain with radio towers. But as a matter of fact, it is a variety of ecozones, all these little micro habitats. And we're always learning something about it. So we don't call it San Bruno Mountain Park. We call it San Bruno Mountain University. It's always teaching us things. And you could find things in the craziest of places. Right here in the middle of this picture, right down there in that canyon, we found a rare plant that thought had been lost. So there are many microhabitats, and you have to get out there and look. Now, the question that really comes up is, why is San Bruno Mountain always thought that it's been so special? Willis Jepson in 1925, in his Flowering Plants of California, listed that there were 10 different zones of endemism. The 10th zone was right here, and that's the Franciscan Zone, which encompasses a fair part of the Central Coast. Now, Jim Roof, who you all know, who had a much better association or understanding of the local flora, said, no, it's not that. The Franciscan Zone actually is just a little bit of Marin. It's San Francisco, and that green dot at the bottom, that's San Bruno Mountain. Now, he called it the Franciscan Zone, but we would actually call this the Franciscan landscape. A landscape is smaller than a zone. So the question is, why are there unique plants in the Franciscan Zone? We have all these other counties and they're fairly similar, but why do we have unique plants? I mean, a lot of our plants you don't have, you have plants that we don't have. I thought we found a chinquapin once up there on San Bruno Mountain. I'd seen it on Mount Tam, but why are the plants different? Well, I think the answer lies in geology. Now, the plants in any one location are due to paleo-endemics, things that used to be there, neo-endemics, things that evolved there, and the plants that are influenced by the soil, which basically comes from geology, and the climate, which is a combination of the water regime and the temperature regime. So these are why you might have unique plants. And I'd like to examine two different areas, geology and water, that I think explains why we have unique plants. Now, this is a diagram of the terrains of San Bruno Mountain. You got San Bruno Mountain terrain here, the Marin Headlands terrain in the middle, and the Alcatraz terrain. Now, what is a terrain? A terrain is actually short for tectonostratigraphic terrain. Tectono is like in plate tectonics. So a terrain is a fragment of crustal material scraped off one tectonic plate and accreted onto another tectonic plate, surrounded by faults, and the adjacent terrains have unique geologic history. So geologists like to show this by, if you take an Oreo cookie and you shear the two cookie parts, the icing will deform with these specific little layers that you see here. Those each could be a terrain. Another way, if you have mud on your boots and you come up and you scrape them off on a log, every time you scrape your boot, you'll put some mud on the log, and you do it again, the mud will be in a slightly different place. That's a terrain. So it's fragments of crustal material scraped off one tectonic plate and accreted onto another tectonic plate. The terrain is surrounded by faults, and there's unique geology there from all the surrounding areas. So San Bruno Mountain is itself a terrain. All of California, west of the Sierra foothills, was accreted onto the North American plate in a series of 33 terrains. The Farallon plate, which is before the Pacific plate, subducted under the western edge of the North American plate quite a while ago, Mesozoic era. And that's when San Bruno Mountain was put on. So the Farallon plate collided with the North American plate, and material from the Farallon plate was accreted onto the North American plate. Now, here's another view. Here's the oceanic crust. It's heavy. It's 2.9 grams per centimeter. And here's continental crust. It's lighter, 2.7 grams per centimeter. So the oceanic crust always goes down. And when they hit, there's an accretionary prism, an area of material accreted on from one plate to another. And right here would be the accretionary prism in cross section. Okay, so what kind of rocks constitute the San Bruno Mountain terrain? It's actually almost all graywacky. We have a little bit of radiolarian chert. We have a little bit of serpentine. And I just want to look at these briefly. Graywacky is this. These are two samples, coarse grain on the left, fine grain on the right, that I collected and polished. And these are graywacky. Graywacky is a very hard sandstone. In fact, the foundation of the Cliff House in San Francisco is San Bruno Mountain graywacky. Now, it's got multiple sizes of sand grains, and the geologists call this poorly sorted. And you can see here in this microphotograph how the grains are of many different sizes. Now, a rose is a rose is a rose, but sand is not sand is not sand. Sand is actually defined only by its size, not by its material. And the sand of graywacky has a large range. poorly sorted sand comes from undersea avalanches on the continental slope. And that's called a turbidity current. So if you look over here, you have the continental shelf, then the continental slope. And if any gravel, sand starts falling, a combination of water and rock is denser than just water. So it flows down as a turbidity current. They've been documented to flow several hundred miles, and it creates sediment. And that's what creates the greywacke. So the sand in San Bruno Mountain greywacke comes from the Sierra Nevadas. Detrital zircon, uranium, lead geochronology shows that it was formed 52 million years ago. Now, it was not accreted that long ago because the San Andreas Fault's only about 20 million years, but it's somewhere between those two. Now, how did it get onto San Bruno Mountain? Plate tectonics. So it was moved from the ocean floor and accreted onto North America. Then radiolarian chert. This is from O'Shaughnessy Boulevard in San Francisco, and I'm sure you have radiolarian chert beds here that you're fond of, but you can see how the ribbons of chert are deformed by the tremendous forces in plate tectonics. This is a close-up of one piece and another piece. Okay, and this comes from the pelagic ocean, and what happens is radiolaria are single-celled animals. Their skeleton, called a test, is from silicon dioxide, which is quartz. And as they die, the quartz skeletons settle to the bottom. And a million years creates a millimeter layer of chert. And then that gets, by tectonic action, brought up onto North America. And finally, serpentine. Serpentine is of a different sort. Serpentine comes from the mantle. These other things come from the crust. Serpentine comes from the mantle, which is below the crust. Now, it's called ultramafic. The Ma stands for magnesium, and the thick comes from ferric. So the mantle is made up of denser material than the crust. It's got a lot of metals. So it's ultramafic rock. So the rocks of San Bruno Mountain terrain come from greywacke, which is sand from the continental shelf, radiolarian chert, which comes from the skeletons of pelagic organisms, and serpentine comes from the upper mantle. So the Franciscan Formation is a melange of different kinds of rock. And plate tectonics is a unifying theory for geology, just as evolution is a unifying theory for biology. But once you understand the geology, you begin to understand why we have rare plants. So San Francisco is the type location for the Franciscan Formation. And the Franciscan Formation was key in understanding the accretionary mechanism of land formation in plate tectonics. So plate tectonics and accretionary prism formed San Bruno Mountain. So going back to my slide earlier, why do we have unique plants? I think the answer lies at least partly in geology. We've got a different geology than Marin or Santa Cruz. And unique geology gives rise to unique plants. So San Francisco and San Bruno Mountain both share similar geology because San Francisco is made up of the San Bruno Mountain terrain, the Marin Headlands terrain, and the Alcatraz terrain. And therefore, we share similar plants. So if you want to know what the plants are from San Francisco, as they were in 1816, at the time of the Kotzebue expedition, when the Russian ship Rurik came into San Francisco Bay, and on it was chamiso, whose name has gone on to plants, chorus, we see his name as well, Eschscholtz, we all know the California poppy, and Romanzoff with the Romanzoffia californica. If you want to see the plants of the 1800s of San Francisco, come to San Bruno Mountain. We've got them. San Francisco paid them over, and we've kept them. Okay, so what makes it unique? Part of it is geology. I think part of it's also the water, and I want to share that with you. As you well know, California has a Mediterranean climate with cool, wet winters, warm, hot, dry summers. But what about these warm to hot, dry summers? Do we really have that? No, we don't, because of fog. We're right next to the fog, and just as you have it, fog comes in. And you can almost set your watch by around 1 o'clock, the fog's going to be coming over the top of the mountain. And the fog is really quite impressive. The atmosphere is the second largest body of water on the planet. And because the air rises over California, the winds come from the Pacific, bearing all this moisture, and it hits our windward slopes, and a lot of it gets deposited. And Doug and I have sat underneath that tree that's coming into play in August on a hot, dry day, and our clothes were soaked sitting down because it was soaked from the water from tree drip from the fog. And it can actually be a rather impressive amount of tree drip, because here we see rain hitting a puddle. Well, that's not rain. That's tree drip. And if you look off in the distance, you can see the fog around the trees. This is in the summertime, in the middle of a dry August. There's so much tree drip that it's accumulating on the ground. So what about tree drip? Now, you got to have trees to have tree drip. But if you look at the mountain, well, there's very few trees. And the ones you see here, they're all exotics. Well, what's going on? The quantity of tree drip is proportional to the cross-sectional area of the tree, and it decreases exponentially as you go away from the fog. Now, James Roof observed the fog drip from these exotic trees adds an abnormal amount of water to the understory. And the result is a microenvironment not representative of the Franciscan landscape. And here's a picture of tall Australian weeds. They're called eucalyptus trees. And they cause, oh, you like that, Larry? I'm glad you like that. The tree drip creates a very unnatural environment. There's hardly a native plant underneath here. You see English ivy and all sorts of trash plants. And that's what happens when you add water from tree drip. So tree drip is not the water factor that's important for San Bruno Mountain. If it's not tree drip, what is it? What does the fog do? Well, there's four things it does: decreased evapotranspiration, increased foliar uptake, increased humidity with decreased temperature, and decreased solar radiation. Let's look at each of these in turn. Decreased evapotranspiration. Photosynthesis requires a constant supply of CO2. Therefore, the leaf stomata have to be open. And here's a diagram I drew, and the CO2 goes in and the O2 goes out. But you have to remember the humidity inside the stoma is 100%. So water is going out all the time through the stomata. And the humidity of the leaf interior is 100%. And 98% of the water that's brought up by the roots of the plant is lost through evapotranspiration. So anything that changes evapotranspiration changes the water budget of all of the plants. Frederick, you need to kill your microphone.
I'm trying.
All right. 400 water molecules are lost for every CO2 molecule gained. So there's a huge loss of water. Anything you can do to decrease evapotranspiration changes the water budget and will change what your plants are doing. So although fog drip is the most obvious effect of fog on plant water budgets, outside of tall forests, the most important effect of fog is decreased evapotranspiration. Now, what about foliar uptake? We all know roots are the sole path for water into the plant. Well, often what we know is not correct. Roots are not the only way. Plants can get it through their leaves and their stems. That's called foliar uptake. In one study, sword fern had the highest foliar uptake, and the California bay laurel with its waxy leaves had the lowest. So increased foliar uptake by plants subjected to fog is a very important factor. Now, increased humidity and decreased temperature is fairly obvious. It's quite independent of evapotranspiration, and it decreases the water loss of the plants. And in the summertime, that's going to be the time when the plants are most water stressed, and fog, which you get in the summer, is very important. And then finally, decreased solar radiation of the soil. It decreases water loss out of the soil. So the combined effects of fog are very complex. It's not just fog drip, because you need big trees for fog drip. And actually, the most important factors, other than the forests of eucalyptus, which have grown up It's decreased evapotranspiration, increased foliar uptake, increased humidity with its decreased temperature, and finally decreased solar radiation to the soil itself. So if we look at why we have unusual plants, I think it's because we have unusual geology, and the geology gives rise to the soil. And we have a water regimen fairly similar to what you have here, but it's different from the rest of the state. And instead of having a Mediterranean climate, we've got something different because of our fog. All right. So let's do just a quick look at history. Where did San Bruno Mountain come from? Jacob Leese was a merchant, came from the Midwest. He came to California and he did a smart thing. He married the governor's sister. And because of that, the governor gave him this huge tract of land. Cañada de Guadalupe, La Visitación y Rodeo Viejo. So that's this valley, Guadalupe Valley, Visitation Valley, and Viejo, or Rodeo Viejo means the old rodeo place. And it totally ignored the real fact that this is the mountain, but nobody wanted the mountain. It was far too steep. You could raise cattle there, but you couldn't do anything more. So Charles Crocker bought it. He's of the Pacific Railroad, and he bought San Bruno Mountain. Now we're going to take a little tour to San Francisco's garbage. You had to be Genovese to get into the garbage business. You had to be part of the family. And this was called a scavenging wagon. And this is why it's called the Sunset Scavenger Company. And my patient gave me this picture. So everybody was very proud of their wagon. But San Francisco just dumped their garbage into San Mateo. Now, in 1895, the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco decided that the garbage was getting to be a problem in San Francisco. So they made it illegal to dump garbage in San Francisco. So the Italians did what every reasonable person would do. You take it to the county border and you dump it in the next county. And the next county was unincorporated, so they couldn't fight it. And this is what San Francisco did all the way up into 1960 when the dump was closed. And once the dump was closed, that mountain in the background, San Bruno Mountain, got to be really valuable real estate. It's right next to San Francisco, ripe to be developed. And who owned it? The Crocker Land Company owned it. And they formed what was called the West Bay Associates in 1962. It was the Crocker Land Company working with the Ideal Cement Company of Denver, who owned the Bay Bottom, and Rockefeller was going to finance it. What they're going to do is just take 250 million cubic yards off the far end of San Bruno Mountain, build a little conveyor belt over the 101, and truck it down south of the airport right here. And they're going to fill in 26 linear miles of the bay with this dirt. It would be 17 times the size of Foster City. It was huge. Even already had a name for it. It's called New Manhattan. And they're going to put a city of 50 to 70,000 on the nice flat land they created on San Bruno Mountain. And the city was all in favor of it. In 1963, they built the Guadalupe Parkway right here just to facilitate this development. And if you ever wondered why that parkway is there, it doesn't fit in the environment at all. It's because it was built when everybody was planning on developing the mountain. Well, that was until three little naive little ladies in Berkeley on a Christmas time, looking through this very window, sipping tea and eating almond cookies, said that, you know, the bay is awfully pretty. And there was this article in the Oakland Tribune from the Army Corps of Engineers saying by the year 2020, at the current rate of filling, the bay will be a narrow shipping channel. And they said, we don't like that. We think the bay is beautiful. They had no idea of its ecological importance. And what they did is they formed Save the Bay. Esther Gulick, Sylvia McLaughlin, and Kay Kerr. They're all faculty wives, and Kay's husband was chancellor. So they formed Save the Bay. And with their work, and I won't go into the details, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission in 1965 was established, and you could no longer dump dirt into the bay without a permit. And that's stopped the development of San Bruno Mountain. So these three women almost single-handedly, at least they ran the show, saved it. So West Bay Associates was stopped from their 1962 plan, but they still owned the mountain. And in 1971, they formed Visitation Rancho. And it was a combination of the Foremost McKesson Company, Crocker Land Company. And they envisioned the city of 30,000. And this diagram is for one of their sales brochures, a city of 30,000 right here on the flat land of San Bruno Mountain. And that's when the local citizens got involved. They formed something called the Committee to Save San Bruno Mountain. And they tried to stop the development. This is Dave Schooley, one of the guys still alive who was active at that time. And they had a very active citizens movement to try to stop the development. And the development changed its name from Visitation Rancho to Crocker Hills. And the Committee to Save changed it to San Bruno Mountain Watch. And there was years of litigation. And then these butterflies were found on the mountain. Dick Arnold, an entomologist in Berkeley, found the Mission Blue. And there's a decade of litigation. And finally, in 1982, Section 10A was added to the Endangered Species Act. And they specifically mentioned San Bruno Mountain as a way of going forward, where if the landowner gives money to conserve an endangered species, they'd be allowed to take or kill a certain amount. And that was called the Habitat Conservation Plan. And in 1986, it became a park. All right, enough of history. How about we look at some plants? I'm willing to stop for just a moment if there's a question. Let me look at the chat. Oh, someone likes the Oreo. Okay, very good. Well, let's go on to some plants. I want to talk about our rare, threatened, and endangered species. There are 14 of these. 4 of them are actually endemic, and I want to talk about them. There are 8 rare, threatened, and endangered species, and then 2 species which are gone. They're extirpated. Let's look at our endemic species. And I'm gonna have to change this because it's not just endemic species, it's endemic plants, because 2 of them do not yet have species status, and I'll tell you why. All of ours are Manzanitas, okay? These 2 are, the CBR stands for considered but rejected. They're not yet formal species, they're formas. And there's a reason why. Uva ursi is polyploid. It can either have a full complement at 26 or a full complement at 52. The taxonomy is still evolving. Parker and Vasey wrote the section on Manzanitas, both for Jepson and the Flora of North America. And they said that before we declare anything as a new species, we're going to have to do their DNA. Now, this is an aerial view of Pacific rock. Right here is the Pacific Manzanita, but they're hybrids already we've identified on the mountain, and they're just waiting to have their DNA done. So San Bruno Mountain is ground zero for speciation in the Manzanitas. Now, a third of Manzanitas are polyploid, and California is the world center for all Manzanitas. There's 106 of 107 Manzanitas in the California floristic province. And you may notice these numbers are a little higher than Parker and Vasey have in their book, but they've discovered another plant. So it's now 106 and 107. The Central Coast is the center for Manzanita diversity. San Bruno Mountain is the center for speciation. And that map I showed you, Pacific Rock, is ground zero. It even has other plants there that have yet to be named. And that's according to Parker and Vasey. Okay, so we have 2 endemic species and a total of 4 endemic Manzanitas. Let's look at them. This is a Manzanita dike. And all these plants that you look at here are Imbricata. It's San Bruno Mountain Manzanita. That's Dave Schooley in the front, and right over his head is Doug Alshouse, my co-author and the head author actually of the book. And you notice the plants here are just a couple inches high. They're not as high as a guy's shoe. It's a prostrate plant. The leaves are overlapping or imbricated, like this. They look like shingles on a roof. It's a light green color. The hairs are long and glandular. The leaves are lobed. At the bottom, you see it's called cordate. And it's got stomata both on the top and the bottom. You can see these with a 10 power loop. And this is the flower. Now you may notice that I didn't identify the plant by the flower. Usually we identify plants by flowers, but in the Manzanitas, they're all virtually the same. You have to look at hair size, stomata location, things like that. This is Imbricata when you let PG&E get up there with a mower. They had the right to clear the road. You can see the roads over there 4 feet at a lower level, but they had a mower, so they might as well mow, and they go right through the Imbricata. Luckily, this has come back. Now, remember I said it was prostrate, and that's what Park and Vasey have in their book. And I showed you that picture a moment ago. But here's Doug on Powerline Ridge, and that's a Imbricata plant. And at Doug's 5'11", it's almost as tall as he is. So the question is, although Park and Vasey call it prostrate, what is it? Well, things are still evolving. We think, Doug and I, after digging around, on the left on Manzanita Dike, it's terribly poor soil. Where he's standing on the right on Powerline, the soil is actually quite rich. So things are still evolving. So here's a very pretty little Manzanita. It's one of our rarest. There's only 2 plants in the wild known, and this is Pacific Manzanita, and our Jim Roof, your Jim Roof, described it. So let's look at it. It's got spreading leaves, and it's prostrate. The leaves are quite dark. There's short, non-glandular hairs on them. The base is acute. It's got a petiole, and the upper and lower surfaces, you can see on the left of the upper surfaces, on the right of each pair is the lower surface. That's because they've got different stomata, but they're on the top and the bottom. Beautiful flowers. All right, now this photo was courtesy of Margot Boers. This is Leo Brewery. We're going to hear more about this later, but this has been considered but rejected by CNPS for classification. And it's a mounded plant. There are 1, 2, 3 plants were planted out here. The leaves are spreading. They're not overlapped. Coming up. The base is acute. They definitely have a petiole. And they have no stomata above, but do have stomata below. Gorgeous little plant. It's one of my favorites. The leaves are bifacial. There's different colors, top and bottom. And of all things, they have a very, very pink blossom when they start that turns into slightly more pale as they mature. So that's Imbricata, our own Manzanita. Now, this one is Suborbiculata, or miniature Manzanita. It's got a smaller leaf, and it was described by Walter Knight. It's a mounding plant. It's spreading. It's not imbricated. The bases are acute. It's got a petiole and cute little leaves with a little white rim or pale rim. Now, there are 2 plants that we have up there that are endemic to San Bruno Mountain and are found one other place. Here's Doug in front of Monterra Manzanita. It's quite tall. It's our tallest Manzanita, and it's found only on San Bruno Mountain and Monterra Mountain. It's a tall plant with very robust. Some of these stems are 10 centimeters across. Quite beautiful. It only grows on 2 places on the mountain, on Manzanita Dike and Pacific Rock. So you can see here the leaves are a bit imbricated. Okay, they're overlapping. They have an acute tip and a cordate base. The leaf on the left is the top, the leaf on the right is the bottom. So they're isofacial. They have the same face, top and bottom. Here you can see the imbricated leaves quite nicely. It is a tremendous bloomer. Here it is in February, just crazy with blossoms. And then when you come into the fall, of course, it's just covered with manzanita berries. And manzanita obviously means little apple. And they look like that. We have one other endemic that's found one other place. And that's San Francisco Lasinjia. It grows out on the sand dunes. And if the sand dunes get colonized by weeds or grasses, it dies out. The other place it's found is on the San Francisco Presidio. And both on San Bruno Mountain and the Presidio, efforts are underway to make sure that grasses do not invade the sand dunes. And it's a gorgeous little flower with a beautiful little throat, but it's only about 1 inch across, so they're fairly small. Okay, so those were our endemics. Now, what about some that we presumed were extirpated? And this is gets to be a detective story. So Plagiobothus corycianus, Chorus's popcorn flower. This is the one that we found under that little red dot. Remember at the beginning, I showed you the red dot? And it was named for Chamiso, who was the artist on the Rurik in 1816. It was listed by McClintock in her 1990 book, but we couldn't find it. So we thought it was gone. And we were out looking one time for other plants, and we found this. Now, it's not a very big flower. It's a popcorn flower. That's how big it is. And that's why I was standing on it, photographing a shooting star. And Doug recognized it as a rare plant. He said, Dave, get off this plant. And that's how we found Chorus's popcorn flower. It grows in an area that's about 2 meters by 4 meters, and that's all. You can see the cyme, so it's Boraginaceae. Okay, Creek Dogwood. It was listed by McClintock in a 1968 book as rare when she did her collecting in the 60s. But when she came and did her 1990 book, she said it wasn't found at all. So it was thought to be gone. And now it's really funny. Life finds a way. It's now quite common along Coleman Creek. It was killed when they put in the Guadalupe Parkway, because that's where it had been found. So this is one plant that was killed by development, by the road. And you'll permit me if I give you several pictures of this, because it's such a gorgeous plant. And it's just growing all over the place now in an area we call the bog. And it's got beautiful red bark in the winter. And it's very entertaining. Okay. Here's another plant that was killed when they built the Guadalupe Parkway. This had been found next to what something was called the swimming hole. And when they put in the park in 1963, when they put in the Guadalupe Parkway, they paved it over, and we've never found it since. These are from Crystal Springs, and we are holding off introducing it, but we'd like to reintroduce it, but we want to give it 10 years of looking for it and not finding it. Now, this one is gone, San Francisco Owl's Clover. It's not been seen since the middle 60s. It grew down by the bay. It's usually within 3 meters or so of salt water. It's been developed now. It's called Oyster Point and completely gone. Okay. So those were our rare, threatened, and endangered species, or are they endemics? So these are not endemic. Coactylus, Diablo sunflower, spine flower, San Francisco Kalinsia, Erebus Blepharophilia. We'll see each of these. San Francisco's wallflower, Iris longipetala, and Silene veracunda. Okay, so these are non-endemic. This is Blepharophilia, coast rock cress. It's a beautiful little plant. I love the color. It's the only color like this on the mountain. And the plant takes the darndest places to grow. Look at this. It's growing in a little crack in a rock. Here's another one on a crack in a rock. So it's a good name, rock cress. And it's got this gorgeous little color and puts out little 4-petaled blossoms. Another one, this is spine flower. It grows over on the Daly City dunes. And also if the dunes get covered in grasses, it will get extirpated. So it's over there. It's got a lot of adaptations for the dry area. You notice here all the hairs on the leaves and the stem to keep it moist. Very small blossoms, just a couple millimeters across, but adapted to the sand. Now this is our San Francisco Kalinsia, a beautiful little flower. Doug and I found the largest grouping of this growing in a scree slope below an old mining area, the quarry. It's awfully pretty. Now, this probably has the best aroma of any of our plants, San Francisco wallflower. Whenever somebody smells it, they go, oh, wow. But we aren't the only ones who appreciate it. Also, the insects love it. You see the little fly growing on there. And before you take a snurf of the plant, check it, because there's another fly, but the fly's not standing upright. What's going on? Ooh, there's a crab spider that just grabbed him. So before you sniff this flower, look for the bugs and the spiders on it. This is our coast iris, very pretty. Vertical fronds, vertical leaves, I mean. This is one of our rare flowers. This is San Francisco campion. Doug and I have done a lot of conservation work on this plant. It's got some very unusual characteristics about the blossoms. Very striped calyx. Grows up at the top of the mountain where the wind just blows like crazy, and they have very brittle stems, so they get broken off by the wind. But San Francisco campion, the type location is Mount Davidson. Now here's another one that we couldn't find for a while. We thought was lost, but it's the Mount Diablo sunflower, and we've got it. Its leaves look very much like mule's ears, but instead of being wavy, they're very straight. Big flower, sunflower, and they grow just like the wavy leaves mule's ear. They're out in the grasslands. Now, some locally rare. This is our Clematis, and we've recently learned that the two plants that are out there were probably planted by a person. And we've noted in just the last couple of years, it's gone from a very small plant to huge plants, which kind of supports the idea it's been recently planted there. Coffee fern, Palea andromedifolia. There are only 3 on the mountain. In 2 places, it's a single plant. Now, this one you recognize. I'm sure you have it on your Mount Tam, giant trillium. It's just a gorgeous plant. Whenever you're lucky enough to see it, you just have to photograph it. There are 21 plants on the mountain in 3 locations that are fairly disparate. But it's such a gorgeous plant. Now, this one I've mentioned a little bit before. This is white pitcher sage. This is the one that we found only in 2 locations of the mountain. And the way we located it was somebody in the nursery, this is the nursery manager at the time, showed it to us in the nursery, and they're growing it. And we said, where'd you find that? But it grows in such limited areas. You've got to go everywhere on the mountain if you're going to see all the plants. You recognize this one. It's one of my favorites. Back when I taught nature up near Yosemite, it was one of the first ones I found up there. On San Bruno Mountain, there's only one location up Devil's Arroyo where it's growing in the wild. We have a number of places where we have outplanted it from seed. I think we all enjoy columbine. Okay, there are some plants that have been extirpated and then reintroduced. One of them was a Manzanita Leo Brewery, which we've seen earlier, Myanthema dilatatum, and the Dune Tansy. Now, here is Leo Brewers, and we saw this picture before. And Jim Roof, and I believe this picture is from Marin, actually. Jim Roof was a botanist, self-educated, and he was hiking on the mountain along a ridge called Powerline, and he found a brand new Manzanita, and it was in May of 1964. But unfortunately, a fire came through in September of 64 and burned it to the ground, and it never resprouted. but Jim was a nurseryman and he was adept at growing them from cuttings. And when he found it in May, he took cuttings. He was successful in keeping them going. And in 1987, Steve Edwards wrote to the park and he said, would you like to have your Manzanita back? We've been dreaming of the possibility that it could be reintroduced into the wild. So this is the plant that 15 were planted onto the mountain in 3 locations, and they didn't write it down. But we found 2 of them so far. Here's another one that was growing on the mountain. Somebody dumped a load of garbage on them and killed them. And they were taken some back to the East Bay Regional Parks Garden, Myanthemum dilatatum, and it got reintroduced to the park. And Doug goes out there on a weekly basis, weeds out weeds around this, and they're slowly spreading, but they're probably not more than a meter by a meter or a meter by 2 meters in the area. And we keep an eye on it, but we've never seen it grow a berry. They're growing by rhizomes. We keep looking at it. It's got a beautiful white berry with red stripes. This is the Dune Tansy. A friend of ours sent us a picture and said, Doug, what fern is this? And it's not fern at all. It's a Dune Tansy. It's growing in 2 locations, both planted. Now, limited distribution. This is Dutchman's pipe or Aristolochia. And the fruit is very unusual, a flower, and it's got this little opening off to the side. And this is why it's called Dutchman's pipe, because of that shape. And if you open it up, the insect goes through here and it goes around this pathway to get to the flower. So the sexual parts are right here, way back at the back, and you have to be able to get in there to find it. And it's done by a fungus gnat. We found this fungus gnat inside one of them. Now, I'll just show you a couple of beautiful species, and then we're running out of time. This is the simple Campion, Silene schooleri. On the right is our native one. It's the San Francisco Campion. They're both natives, but you can see they've got similar structure in this little corolla here and this little point coming off here. This is a dog violet. Cute little guy. Sodalcia, checker bloom, has both male and female flowers. This is a male flower. They're a little smaller, a little darker red. This is a plant, you usually smell it before you see it. This is our Hummingbird Sage. It's quite a gorgeous plant, grows all over the place in thick bunches because it's rhizomatous. You recognize this. It's not rare, but it's certainly beautiful, our houndstone. We have it in some of the oak forests because we have forests on the mountain you just can't see from the freeways. This is sticky seed. Grows out in open hillsides. Sometimes in such numbers you can see it from hundreds of yards away. This is common. I haven't updated the name, but blue dicks that generally are blue, but also come in white. This is a common wood mint, Stachys aegigoides. It's got a gorgeous little flower, but you got to get up close to really appreciate it. All right, so we're at the end of this. What's new going on? Well, Elizabeth McClintock in 1968 wrote this, The Proceedings of California Academy of Sciences, The Flora of San Bruno Mountain. Then in 1990, CNPS published this book by Elizabeth McClintock. Walter Knight, you know, it's down here at the bottom, worked at the East Bay Regional Park Garden. Paul Rieberg is a botanist in San Francisco, and she did this book. And Doug carries it around, but unfortunately, this is a book of, it's a flora, and there's not a color picture in there, and there's not even a picture of flowers. So I proposed to Doug that why don't we do a book? It'll be so easy. Right, it's taken us 8 or 9 years, but here it is. It'll be coming out in November. It's published by Heyday Books. So as Doug says, we'll see you on the mountain. And I want to remind everybody that Doug is going to be leading a hike on May 14. I believe you're going to have to sign up through your chapter, but Doug is going to give you a tour and you can see this all for yourself. See you on the mountain.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. Fascinating, fascinating with all that background and the geology and history. It's just great. There's a couple of questions. Vaughn asked, does the leaf take up water from upper and lower sides? I think it's, I'm assuming referring to two-sided stomata.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if any of the papers I've read answered that. But you can see it if you take a spray bottle and take a plant in a at home or something and spray it and just watch. If it does have good foliar uptake, the leaves will be dry and the spray that hit the pot will still be wet. Okay. The dogwood grows along the Colma Creek, so it's quite wet. Dogwoods like it wet.
I have one in my garden that is, I've kind of adapted to semi-drought tolerance, and it's doing okay.
You haven't managed to kill it yet.
Okay,
Right.
if I can jump in on the question, because I did write it down. For the most part, it does very well when its feet are wet. So it grows all along Colma Creek. But down in the on the hike this coming Saturday, we'll be going through what we call the bog, which is a high elevation, somewhat of a wetland. And there is dogwood that will grow quite a distance away from an active creek, but at the same time, this area is constantly moist in the ground. So it does need some moisture, but it can survive without its feet being totally wet.
Well, thank you, Doug. Someone asked a question, Doug, how'd you get interested in the mountain? That's a great story from you.
My lap that I just got rebuilt for some strange reason, right before you started talking, David, I lost my internet connection, so I had to reboot and join the party after that. The question was, how did I get interested? Well, what happened was I got married. And my wife and I were, before we got married, I was living out in the Richmond district out in 28th and Balboa, and she wanted to know where we should live. And I said, well, I don't know. And she said, well, how about Southern Hills? And I had been living in San Francisco. This was 1976. I moved up there in 1970 from Santa Clara. And I said, where the heck is the Southern Hills? And so anyway, they're out on the San Bruno Mountains because she had lived up here. So a year and a half after we married in 76, in 1978, we bought our house up here, which is right at the very top of the development. And right across the street from me in about another 8 years was going to be San Bruno Mountain State and County Park. So I started walking and then running in there, and eventually met someone who introduced me to botany, and the rest is history.
And I got into it because my parents have always been interested in plants and animals. And they took us out as kids. And I'm sure you've all heard the term nature deficit disorder. If you take a kid out while they're young, they'll learn to appreciate it, and they'll be able to appreciate it as an adult. There's probably few of us who are now CNPS members who didn't have some love for plants and be taken out in nature. So I grew up in an area where we were the only house in the area. We ran around catching snakes and lizards, and my poor mom had to suffer through 4 boys keeping snakes and lizards in cages for years. And then I taught nature near Yosemite, and things just went on like that. And then I happened to take a hike with Doug, and I was so impressed with his knowledge and his ability to teach. And I was so impressed with how wretched the book was. I said, Doug, let's make a book. And he said, nah, I don't quite trust you I'm not gonna give you my text. So I said, great, you write the book, I'll give you the pictures. And he decided I was probably real. And we've been working together. And I have to say, working with Doug is one of the greatest adventures I've had. let's look at some other things. Does PG&E own part the radio towers on? The radio towers are privately owned, but not by PG&E, by the broadcasting company. Doug, what's the name of that company?
Well, American Towers runs,
It's owned by American.
Yeah, they basically own the top of the mountain there, but.
Yeah, what PG&E has is a right of way to service their towers and to have their power towers and their gas line go over the mountain. So any other questions?
If you would like to ask a question in person, use the reaction button and it has a raised hand in it, because I can't see more than a handful of folks because of the number on the screen. But while we're waiting, there's I believe it's called Friends of San Bruno Mountain.
Yes.
And I appreciate you describing the relationship between the Yerba Buena chapter and the Friends. And I believe the Friends have a nursery, don't they? And can you buy plants for the garden in there, or is that only for restoration?
Oh, well, I'll try to make a long story short. I was one of the founding members and the first vice president of Friends of San Bruno Mountain, and that was founded in 1996. Even though I had been interested in botany from about 1987, about 8 years later in 1995, we started having these conferences for San Bruno Mountain over in Brisbane, and that's where I met Jake Sigg, and Jake eventually became my mentor. During that time, while I was running in the park, I kept seeing these signs about somebody wanting to do the San Bruno Mountain Botanical Society botanical garden. And so I attended a meeting, and of course, and in 1995, there was also a lot of eucalyptus cutting that was going on in the mountain. And there was a meeting at Kathy Manis's house, not far away from where I live. And I wanted to meet this guy named Roman Gankin. And I thought Roman was going to be some young dude in a Brooks Brothers suit. And I walked into the dining room, sat around the table, and Roman is sitting there. He's at least 20 years my senior, and he's wearing a goose down vest, and he's one of the best botanists that has been around this area. So we ended up founding, we went before the County Parks Commission to seek permission to do a botanical garden. And Nita Spangler, who was a longtime board member, said, well, this San Bruno Mountain Botanical Garden Society kind of reminds me of like ladies walking around in these frilly dresses with little umbrellas. Why don't you just call yourselves Friends of San Bruno Mountain? And we said, well, you can call us anything you want as long as we can play in your yard. And so we became Friends of San Bruno Mountain. We eventually in 2001 built a nursery in South San Francisco at Orange Memorial Park, and operated that for about 4 years until the lawyers over there was a fire in one of the abandoned greenhouses, and the lawyers basically closed it all down because they were eventually interested in just developing the area. So we were basically dormant for about 2 or 3 or 4 years. I kept trying. Kathy and Louis Manis, our founders, moved away to Santa Cruz, actually in Aptos, and so I became an orphan trying to keep it going. The board was gone, everything else, and I finally just decommissioned it because the state more than the federal government was more interested in taking money from us. So what was left, we ended up building a nursery in Brisbane, and San Bruno Mountain Watch also signed on a little bit later, and we finished it up. So they are now operating the nursery, and you can go. They have several plant sales a year. If you go on their website, mountainwatch.org, you will be able to access information about that, volunteering, and also read my Doug's Mountain Journal, which I originally started writing for Friends of San Bruno Mountain, and I now write it for the Yerba Buena chapter and also for Mountain Watch's website.
So the nursery is called the Mission Blue Nursery. They only feature plants from San Bruno Mountain. Doug funded it to begin with and helped build it, and now it's up there, and San Bruno Mountain Watch runs it. But you can go up there and buy San Bruno Mountain plants.
Great.
And Julie, you got a question?
Yeah, I just want a clarification. So when you said you were talking about, I'm sorry, I've forgotten which one of the Manzanitas it was, but you said it's our tallest. You meant the tallest on San Bruno Mountain, not the tallest of.
Oh, absolutely. There's others that are 30 feet tall. This is just.
Yeah, I've seen taller. That's why I had to.
Actually, we have one other one, Arctostaphylos crustacea, which grows over in Buckeye Canyon, that is also quite tall. So
One thing we haven't talked about at all is climate change and whether there's a high likelihood of extinction because there's no place to go for species that are already toward the top of the mountain.
Yeah. We noticed this year that all of our giant chain fern and in one location, all of our lady fern are gone. That's not been known before. Whether they come back or not, it's not known. But we probably don't have as precise knowledge as we would need to be able to measure climate change. The book that we've got is going to do a lot. Well, it's qualitative, not quantitative. You probably need quantitative data. Doug?
Yes, yeah. I've been living up here for 45 years almost, and I mean, the park is right across the street from me. I'm 700 feet above sea level. I'm on the south side of what's known as the Alemany Gap. So I'm looking across at Mount Davidson, Mount Sutro, and Twin Peaks. And the gap between the old Mission Hills, and if you pick up an old floor of San Francisco, they were known as the Mission Hills. Between the Mission Hills and the San Bruno Mountains is the Alemany Gap. Even when they first started talking about climate change as global warming, they gave a little bit of wiggle room for some areas like ours here on the coast in San Francisco and even up in Marin. Because I've noticed from my vantage point, I can also see Mount Tamalpais behind, and also up all the way up to Point Reyes. And I've noticed over the years that a lot of rainstorms flow from the southwest to the northeast, and they seem to funnel right through Mount Tamalpais. But over here, as David pointed out earlier, fog plays an immense part of what goes on San Bruno Mountain. As long as we have these cold ocean currents, because I mean, the summertime up here is really, really bad. You don't see the sun. When you're standing on Mission Street and you're looking up and you see a white sky, I'm in that white sky, and that white sky is fog. I keep a gauge here, a professional gauge in my backyard, and I record easily 1.5 inches to almost 2 inches of moisture or precipitation a year of just fog. As long as we have that fog coming through the Golden Gate and the Alemany Gap and the San Bruno Gap, we should be okay here. If things changed in years from now, then we can talk about something else. But right now, those influences play a big part of what goes on in San Bruno Mountain.
Okay. This is another question from Sue Rosenthal. How often do you visit San Bruno Mountain together, and how do you search for the presumed extirpated plants?
Well, I'm out quite a bit because I walk almost daily. So David and I have, we're in this stage where, as he said earlier about writing a book, it sounds like it's easy to do, but and it is. And we had a lot of fun for about 6.5 years, almost 7 years. We were out almost every Saturday when there was not deer season, and when David didn't have to go give a talk at a conference, either somewhere in the United States or somewhere overseas. We get out maybe, well, I always wait for him to email me and tell me that he needs to have a fix. And so we'll meet on a Saturday and spend some time and go someplace crazy that we've been to before. And as far as looking for these extirpated plants, this is a very big place. It doesn't seem like it's that big at 4 square miles, but there's a lot of very rugged terrain where, I just turned 75. And so it's not so easy getting around as it was maybe 10 years ago when we were a lot younger when we started the book. But we try to get out as much as we possibly can, and we have a lot of fun. We like to kid each other. We laugh a lot. So
yes, and Sue, the way to find plants is you drag your partner off to places that he's never been before, in months where he's not gone up there before, and you just have to search every square inch of the mountain, because honestly, there's a lily that probably grows in an area that's 5 feet by 10 feet and nowhere else. And if you don't thrash your way to that part of the mountain through the brush, it's a horrible little place. You won't find it. The coarse popcorn flower, it grows right next to an intermittent stream, and when it flows in the winter, it creates a little gravel bed, and it only grows in that gravel bed. The coffee fern grows in 3 places on the mountain, and 2 of the places have a single plant. You just have to walk everywhere at every month of the year, and that's how you find things.
The last time my wife and I were on the mountain, she got a bad case of poison oak, and I'm curious, with all the bushwhacking you're describing, how do you avoid that?
You don't, stop laughing, Doug. You don't avoid it. You get it, and you just tough your way through it. The trouble is, my wife gets it from me, and then there's hell to pay. But there's poison oak all over the place. It's the most widespread shrub in California. It's all over the mountain. I carry pruners, and whenever I go on the paths, I'm pruning the poison oak, and sometimes you get it from that, but you just have to be really careful. But unless you're fearless, you're not going to find the plants. So you just got to go everywhere at every time of the year.
And there's a couple of plants on the bog trail, not too far off the parking lot. And I've noticed, and this is just May, they are starting to turn from green to they're starting to get kind of red now. And usually that doesn't happen until maybe about late June. So although everything was early this year because of those 2 huge rainstorms we got back in October, and then we had a great December as far as rainfall, and that kind of jump started a lot of plants this year on the mountain. It's kind of tough trying to schedule spring hikes. Used to like to do a lot of stuff in April and May, and then I started moving it up into late March, and I might even have to go mid-March to like the first week of April, because David and I were out chasing down a friend of ours, Paul Pascal, had taken a picture of some iris on his iPhone with iNaturalist, and it was identified as Iris fernaldii, which is not here. I researched the location on CalFlora, and a shout out to Cynthia Powell for the awesome work she's done with that website, and found out that the only populations were around La Honda up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And of course, that's on the other side of the San Andreas Fault. And so David and I went out to chase it down, and it didn't take us about 10 minutes to figure out that it was just a white morph of Iris longipetala, which is, quite common here. So anyway, we have fun doing stuff like that.
Well, I think we've come to the end of questions, and what a pleasure to have both of you and And David, thanks so much for the wonderful presentation, and really looking forward to your book coming out in November. And gave me ideas of what a natural history of Mount Tam would look like.
Yeah.
If you have energy for that, that is your next project.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome to come up to the Mission Blue Nursery on May 19. Doug and I will be giving some short talks about how the book got done, and we'll be signing and selling books, and there'll be a dinner. If you go to
That's November 19th.
what did I say?
May.
No, November 19th, because book comes out November 1. But you'll see announcements for the dinner on the San Bruno Mountain Watch website. Julie has another question.
Actually, I just wanted to respond to the poison oak. I put it in the chat, but I get poison oak really badly, and I have two ways that work for me. One is there's this very harsh old-fashioned bar soap called Fell's Naphtha, and if I lather with it super heavily, when I get home, I do not get poison oak. And the other thing that I discovered by accident, and I heard from a dermatologist that they'd heard this from other people, is to go swimming in the ocean 2 or 3 days in a row.
Actually, there's, I have actually heard that if you accidentally touch it and you know it, that if you're carrying a bottle of water, if you wash it with cold water, it may not prevent it from bothering you, but it'll sure knock it down. And never shower in hot water, because that opens the pores up and lets it get in a little bit further. But yeah, if you have a bottle of water and you just pour it, wash that area off, it will do you a lot of good.
All right. And I want to give a shout out again. This Saturday, Doug is going to be leading a hike. Doug, they sign up through Herba Buena?
No, I think the sign up, I'm not positive. I haven't talked. Is Sue Schlosser still on?
Yeah, I was going to say she would know.
Sue would know. Sue, you want to unmute and answer the question? Well, she may
not be there. Anyway, Doug does a great hike. He's a wonderful hike leader. He got me.
What I was going to say is David is, in my opinion, the master of PowerPoint. He is absolutely fabulous at it, and I mean, I've narrated some old slideshows and things that I did, but he's so good at what he does on that I just let him do that. But I prefer to do my talking on the mountain. So yeah, I'm hoping that some people will come out. I'll be there waiting for you. And that's my element when I get out on the mountain. And so I'll do most of the talking there.
All right, I'm sure, David, you can post on your website how to
I'm sure it's on our website. I just haven't looked. If you go on the field, Google field trips Marin CNPS, and it should be at the top of the list.
Larry's shaking his head saying, yeah, it's there. Okay, excellent.
Great. So I think we're almost at 9 o'clock. We're going to call it a night. As for next our public meeting in June, we're still working on that. So stay tuned and watch out for an email in your box or check the website. So again, thanks for coming. And thanks again, David, for a wonderful presentation. Hope to see you next month.
Thank you.